There's been a lot written on the subject of playing small pairs in Hold'em, and there's certainly more than one train of thought as to the best way to play them. Generally speaking, small pairs consist of deuces through sixes. Unlike high pairs, small pairs shouldn't be played automatically in all situations. Several factors determine whether you should enter a pot with a small pair: position, chip count, number of players, and the cost to play. Your chip count, as well as your opponent's chip count, are important factors when deciding when to call. If a player is raised to 500 and only has 500 left, it isn't worth trying to catch trips on the flop, since all you'll be able to win is an additional 500. Now, if you had to call that same 500, but both you and your opponent had 30,000 in front of you, it might make sense to see a flop and hope to win a monster pot if you're lucky enough to catch a set of trips on the flop. The number of players should also be a consideration, especially in a structured limit game. If there are 5 or more players, you'll be getting excellent value to try and hit a set. Lastly, ideally with small pairs, you'd want to see the flop as cheaply as possible. If someone has just called the big blind in front of you, then you could limp along, and that's not a bad play at all. However, if, say, the blinds were 1 in 200 and opponent raised the pot to 1,500, well, that's just too big a bet to try and see the flop. Once you've actually gotten to a flop, how you proceed should once again depend on the number of opponents in the pot. If there are several players in the pot, you should probably only continue if you flop a set. Against just 1, maybe 2 opponents, though, you might want to take one more stab at winning the pot in the hopes that, your little pair is the best hand. When choosing when to do that, flop texture is of the utmost importance. For example, suppose you're in a 3-way pot and the flop comes queen, 10, 9 with 2 of a suit. This would be a horrible looking flop for a little pair of 5s. If anyone bets, you should fold. And even if they don't bet, you shouldn't try a bluff here, since it's far too likely that one of your opponents has something to go with that flop, like a jack 10 or a king queen. A better textured flop would look something like queen queen 3 or king 7 deuce. With these flops, you should go ahead and bet your small pairs, since your opponents will probably fold unless, in the first case, they have a queen, or in the second case, they have a king. Now, if an opponent calls your bet, it's time to abort mission unless you catch your card on the turn. If you consider yourself an aggressive player, then you'll probably want to raise with these hands on occasion as well. The best time to do that is when you're looking to steal the blinds. The first thing you want to be aware of is that this will only work if no one's entered the pot yet. Being in late position, well, that increases your chances of the play being successful. If you do it from early position, there's generally too many hands stacked behind you that might call your raise. When you do raise with a small pair in position, you should always think about playing it strong after the flop. If you have just one opponent in the blind, for example, that called your raise, you should bet on virtually any flop, even if flop is ugly as ace, king, queen. Reason being is that since you raised before the flop, he doesn't know that you missed that flop. If he has a hand like queen 9, you'll probably be able to win the pot with your flop bet. So, as a general rule with small pairs, you want to see the flop cheaply and only continue after the flop when you've made trips.